into another edition of Tusk Talk. I'm Brad Caldwell, and on the line I've got Kevin McPherson along with us once again to talk all things Tusk, all things Razorback, and we're excited to have you on, Kevin.
Hey, good to be with you, Brad, always.
Man, it's good. Christmas is upon us, and 2019 has wound down, and another coaching search has come and gone, and the Razorback basketball team is still winning, and a lot of good things going on in Razorback land.
Yeah, I think if you're a Razorback fan going into this holiday season, there are reasons, to be hopeful and excited, and as bad as things got with the football program, when you make a hire and you start to see the staff round out, you see Arkansas able to salvage a little bit in this early signing period. Probably didn't, if you go back even 10 days prior to the signing period, there's a lot of gloom and doom, and now there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful. So, yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah, a lot of reasons. And of course, with the Razorbacks, it just, and their fans, it just seems like, things that they've been beaten down for so long, that it's just been a rough time for everybody in Razorback Nation, but it does seem like there is a little bit of hope out there. And, man, I'm going to get your reactions on a few things, and we haven't gotten a chance to talk about the football hire. Last week you were busy, and then the week before that we were actually at the press conference, so we missed the Tusk Talk for that week. I guess it was Tusk Talk for that week, the whole press conference at that time. Just give us some initial reaction that you have to the Sam Pittman hiring, and then some of the assistant coaches hirings that you've heard of so far.
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing is, we were hearing some of the names that were out there that I wasn't crazy about, that I think maybe a lot of Hog fans were looking at. It's specifically Lane Kiffin. I'm not saying he won't do a good job, and I may be singing a different tune down the road, but some of the candidates Arkansas looked at, I think what became a reality about this job is how things changed pretty quickly for Kiffin once Ole Miss opened up. And I think for Arkansas fans, it said a lot about where maybe Arkansas is right now in perception-wise. But to get Sam Pittman, who's been obviously a big part of the success at Georgia, now he doesn't have head coaching experience. He doesn't really have coordinator experience, but we've seen. All you have to do is look at LSU to see maybe some similarity there in a guy like Ed Orgeron. Finally having success, as a head coach, and wild success at that, obviously. But LSU's also recruits differently than Arkansas, so that's not exactly apples to apples. The point is, with a guy like Sam Pittman, he identifies as an Arkansan. This is a place he wanted to be. A lot of players really pushed for this, former players. He was a guy that recruited well. I don't think you can be an associate head coach in there without leadership qualities. I think that's one of the things when he was brought onto staffs that other head coaches identified. So that tells you that there's a chance that this could be a really good situation. I go back to recruiting, but I also think when you mentioned assistants too, I think that's obviously a big key for a guy that really doesn't have head coaching experience. Who does he surround himself with? How does he build leadership in the program around him? And having capable coordinators. And I think, they're off to a good start getting Barry Odom on the defensive side of the football. So I think so far so good, Brad, given the circumstances and where the reality of this Arkansas job is. Obviously, Arkansas was not in a place to go out and lure some of the hot names that are head coaches. It just wasn't falling that way for where Arkansas is at this time, perception-wise, is what kind of job is that? And I think getting Sam Pittman, given all of those factors, right now it looks like a win to me.
I can't agree with you more on that where we were perception-wise with Arkansas and just kind of where they ended up, because we know that Sam Pittman was not the first choice for the Razorbacks. We understand that. How it all fell tells you that the perception of this job right now is that it is a job, or it is a career killer. I mean, there's speculation that former Arkansas Tech graduate Eli Drinkwitz turned Arkansas down before they got to Pittman. I mean, I don't know that for sure. I've known Drinkwitz for quite a while, to be honest with you, but I don't know for sure if he turned it down or not, got the opportunity. But I do know that there was at least some talk about the fact that they wanted to bring Eli Drinkwitz on, and that tells you a little bit that he decided he wanted to go to Missouri, considering that he's from Alma, Arkansas. So I agree with you 100%. You got a guy in here that wants to be a Razorback. He understands the situation, identifies himself as an Arkansan, says this is his last stop. Basically, from everything that I've understood, was a guy that was getting ready to retire anyway, and now he's pushing that back because, he got his dream job. But the guys he's put around himself and the speculation about some of the guys that he's going to bring on this staff, and I'll be honest with you, you and I we disagreed a little bit on the Lane Kiffin thing, but the reason I was on board with Lane Kiffin was the fact that he could bring assistants in. Sam Pittman's bringing guys in that we thought Lane Kiffin would bring in with him. So that,
right,
and to me, is a huge deal. And right now there's a lot of smoke around Kendall Briles as Pittman's offensive coordinator. And I have a source that told me last Monday that Arkansas had their guy. Now, when I start putting the timeline together on that, I got some ridicule about that because I did put it out there. But now that we start putting the timeline together, and if it is in fact Briles was in town on Monday night, and my source got word that Arkansas had their guy. I know where my source was getting his information from. I feel like it's very solid. So in my opinion, basically this waiting game is the fact that Florida State hasn't played their bowl game yet. And once they do, I feel like that Kendall Briles is going to be your guy.
All right. Yeah, this is a and you look at that family tree and the success that Art had at Baylor and the way that they put numbers up and move the ball. I really think no matter, whoever they name, if it's Briles, great. Whoever they get, I think Arkansas's got to come to a conclusion at some point. The way the game is played now, I think the RPO with a talented dual threat quarterback probably equalizes some things if Arkansas gets the guy that can scheme it right. When I say equalize, I mean Arkansas is not going to be able to recruit to the level of about 6 or 7 SEC teams consistently. It's just not going to be able to do it. I don't care who the coach is. And so I think you've got to find you've got to, if you can get a difference maker at quarterback and put some weapons around him, and that quarterback can beat you with passing and the run game as a dual threat. I think that gives Arkansas a chance, because I think what we saw with Bobby Petrino is Arkansas wasn't beating people on the defensive side of the ball. That's where the recruiting hurts more than anything, is on the defensive side, especially on the defensive line. It's just those guys are hard to get. In basketball, it's like getting a 6'10" big man with skill. There's not a lot out there. Those defensive linemen, they go to Alabama, they go to LSU, they go to other schools. There's not as many of those to choose from. And so defensively, it's always going to be a challenge for Arkansas to be at the top of the SEC. On that side of the ball, that's why I think you got to score points. And to score points, I think you've got to weaponize that quarterback position. And to do that, dual threats the way I see it. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but I think, obviously they're not paying me to make these decisions, but I hope that's the way that Arkansas goes moving forward.
Yeah.
Is on offense, start with that quarterback position. And everybody says that's the most important player on the field anyway. Get a guy that's multiple, put some weapons around him, and let's see if Arkansas can compete and push itself into that top 4 or 5, at least every 3 or 4 years. Right. I don't think they can consistently do that, but maybe they can push the right buttons to get close to it.
I think you're dead on 100%. I think one of the things that we can point to is that Arkansas, when it comes to offensive talent, you can get offensive talent out of Arkansas. It's been on the defensive side of the ball where Arkansas has lacked as far as just inside the state in recruiting. I mean, in fact, some of the best players that Arkansas has ever had on the offensive side of the ball have been inside the state. And, of course, you have to go back several years to really kind of identify that as far as the defensive side of the ball goes. And, of course, now, like you said, the way the game is played, the game is not played to where you win with defense anymore. You got to average 35 points a game to be a good, solid football team. And I think Arkansas's got to get up there. They got to get in that 35, 40 point per game range. And I think there's going to be times where Arkansas fans are going to be frustrated because they're going to score 35 and still lose. But even at that, I think where the program has been, there's going to be a little bit of a grace period for the new coach and Sam Pittman to be able to get that going again and get that ball going in the right direction. But I will say that as much offense as we're talking right now, Barry Odom, man, was an incredible hire and a guy that Arkansas has tried to hire in the past when he was at Memphis as the defensive coordinator. It just never worked out. Of course, he ended up at Missouri where he was the defensive coordinator, ultimately the head coach there, and he had mixed reviews there as his head coach. But one thing that he did do, he did beat Arkansas every time he played them. So that being said, Arkansas got a guy and got a couple guys from behind enemy lines there to bring south here to try to get things corrected for the Razorbacks.
Yeah, and it seemed like his defense is, statistically maybe not great all the time, but it seems like they were playmakers in that secondary. It seems like they were able to get turnovers and, whether it was just forcing fumbles or getting intercepted. It just seems like his defense has had playmakers on them that maybe they weren't great. From opening kickoff to the end of the game, but they could turn plays, and sometimes I think that's another thing Arkansas has lacked, or just having guys that can make a play when all else is failing on that side of the ball. And if Arkansas, like you said, I think I agree with this. I think offense is always going to be a key for a program like Arkansas. If they're really good on that side, they get a chance. But on defense, even if you don't have great players, if your scheme can create some turnovers, and which obviously, we know how important turnovers in winning and losing football games. So this is the thing. Arkansas does a good job. I think it's a middle of the SEC. I've said it so many times. At best, right now it's the very bottom. I think at best, consistently, it's a middle of the pack. And then I think it can have those years where it can reach up there and dip into the top 4 or 5. But I think strategically to have a chance at that, I think Bobby Petrino, again, I'd keep going back to him. But he was a guy, and we never saw him have sustained success because he never stayed anywhere very long. But he was a guy that kind of figured it out in terms of, dialing it up the right way. Get an offense that's hard to stop, win the games you're supposed to, be just good enough on defense to keep yourself in games. And I think that's kind of where, if Arkansas can get back to that type of, consistently having good offenses and just stay in games and win the ones they're supposed to, there's no reason they can't be a 7 or 8 win football team most years, and then sneak up there 9 and 10 maybe sometimes. Yeah. And you just never know. The West is so tough, and with Saban on that side of it, you may never feel like you got a chance to win that division if you're Arkansas, but I think things are pointing the best way, and I don't think it can go any lower. That's for sure.
Right.
I can't see that.
Well, I actually had said something to somebody about that. They were afraid of the Pittman hire. He didn't have any head coaching experience, and I said, well, Arkansas just hired a guy with some head coaching experience, 3 years, and I said he just went 2-10 in back-to-back seasons. What's the difference in winning 2 and going 2-10 and going 0-12? I mean, there's very little difference there when it comes to that, especially when you win your first 3, and then you lose every other ball game after that. It's just been brutal. And I want to go ahead and move on to that. I want to get a couple of opinions from you over fired coaches that Arkansas has had recently, both Mike Anderson and Chad Morris. And let's just start with Chad Morris right now. Morris was named the new offensive coordinator at Auburn, and I was just wondering, what are some of your thoughts about that? I know that Razorback fans, Chad Morris has become public enemy number 1, and Gus Malzahn he was public enemy number 1. Now you've got public enemy number 1 and 1A on the same sideline.
Well, it's more reason, I guess, for Arkansas fans to hate Auburn. And that's, that hasn't worked out for Arkansas. A lot that's gotten them right in the last few years. But here's the thing. I think also success is cyclical. I mean, Chad Morris was a coordinator. That's what he was. When Arkansas hired a head coach from SMU, an AAC program that had a losing record, whose best season was 7 wins, and you're bringing that in to head your program in the SEC, I thought that was a mistake. In my mind, he's a guy that's suited for coordinator. We know he's got a relationship with Gus Malzahn. Good for him to land on his feet. Arkansas fans have a bigger reason now to want to beat Auburn. That's, so let's see what happens. But, I felt like Chad was deficient in a lot of ways. I know that he worked the social media thing. I know he had some relative success recruiting. He just, the way I saw it was his teams got worse. I didn't see buy-in. I know there was some other, there were some dynamics behind the scenes that were a little bit different. A lot of that was on him. But you go back, obviously John L. Smith was a Band-Aid, was not a very good one. It fell right off. Bielema comes in with a lot of promise, but really he was not a guy for this to coach in this league to begin with. And I think there was some other stuff there. And then it only got worse for Chad Moore. So I think, that's now you've got a culture of being arguably not only the worst team in the SEC, maybe in all of Power 5 now, and there's been a culture of that struggle for years, not just a couple. So this is a tough turnaround. But again, stick to your knitting. Get coordinators that are strong. Find an identity on offense. Figure out a way. Look around and see the teams that maybe have the same problems that Arkansas has in terms of recruiting against some of the opponents in their own conferences, and how they overcome that to win games and maybe overachieve. Arkansas's got to figure out how to get out of this hole, because it is a deep hole right now, Brad.
It absolutely is, and Chad Morris definitely he dug that hole deeper. You and I have been talking for several years, and you knew how I felt about Bielema, and it really it blows my mind that Arkansas found a way to get worse after Bielema than they were with him. And now it got to the point that it was so bad that there were people that were looking at Bielema as the good old days. It's just been a rough 2 years under Chad Morris. But, I'm a little bit puzzled, I will be honest with you, about the Chad Morris tenure here at Arkansas, because when you listen to pundits, when Arkansas hired Morris, they talked about what a great coach this guy was, and that how he was innovative, and how that, he goes to Clemson, and Clemson becomes, a team that is about to fire one of the preeminent coaches in college football. And because he went over there, he basically helped save that program. But whatever happened with him, his message just did not come across with the players at all. And they didn't follow his leadership. And one of the things that I was told by a guy that was involved in the search, he told me that passion outweighs scheme every single time. And so for whatever reason, Chad Morris could not get the guys to play for him as, some of these other coaches have been able to do at their respective programs.
Yeah. Well, and you could see how dysfunctional things are. Typically when things are dysfunctional, you've got more than one thing going on. A lot of times it's coach's attention to detail, or it's buy-in, or a combination of both. And I really think if you look at Morris, he did not have a very good feel for personnel. I always go back to this example of Rakeem Boyd, who, by the way, I think today is probably going to announce that he's going pro. But I don't even think he knew how to use a running back, let alone all the problems we saw at quarterback. I mean, we didn't see Rakeem. They did not mix up his usage enough. I don't think he got enough touches. Now, granted, he was a guy that was injury prone, and, he's the kind of guy, 2 or 3 touches in a row, he'll tap the hat and he wants to come out for a play or two. But still, you've got to find a way to get your best playmaker the ball in more diverse ways than they did. I thought that was a microcosm. You look at the quarterback problems. Ty Story comes back with Western Kentucky and has a Heisman-type game. It makes me almost think, was it that the guy couldn't identify a quarterback, or just was a quarterback killer here? Because none of them shined. And then we could go on, and obviously I am, but defensively, there's just so many things. So I think buy-in, there was no chance for buy-in because there was so much dysfunctionality within the starting at the top, and I think that once you come out and say the words Arkansas is the worst program in Power Five, I mean that says all you need to know about Chad Morris's ability to run a program, and I'm putting it squarely on him. And I know Bielema had a hand in some of his problems because Bielema had pretty much run the wheels off at the end. But I think Chad Morris was, I think Arkansas would have done better had Bielema stayed than they did with Chad Morris. So
I don't think that there's any disagreeing with that. And I mean, when you say better, I mean, it's relative. I mean, Arkansas's lost their last 19 SEC ball games now. You would think that Bielema would have probably gotten at least one or two of those wins in that time span. And I've repeated, over and over that not only was Arkansas bad under Morris, they were bad under Bielema. They're 4-28 in their last 32 SEC ball games, which is just, it's unfathomable to even say that. Yeah. But let's move on to another fired coach of Arkansas that is having more success. But Mike Anderson over at St. John's pulls out a victory against Arizona out in San Francisco. One of the criticisms under Anderson was that he could never win away from home. And he's taken a St. John's team that really wasn't expected to do much, and he's gotten them playing some pretty good ball over there.
Yeah, and that was a big lie about Mike Anderson. The first couple of years, Arkansas didn't win. I think the only team they beat on the road was Auburn when Auburn was really bad. But you got to remember, he inherited a toxic dumpster fire of a program that had been the worst road team percentage-wise in the SEC before he got there. So it took him a while to turn that around. By the time he left, Arkansas was in the top 2 or 3 in the SEC in road wins. So, it was always a lot of stuff that Mike Anderson got hung with as far as reputation. They really did. The results really didn't match what people said about him, and that happens sometimes. Mike did a good job at Arkansas. Wasn't a great coach, but he did a good job fixing that culture and making Arkansas a competitive program, really a postseason program again. Even though there weren't any deep runs, and that's what ended it for things for him. But the label that he couldn't win on the road and couldn't win big games, I disagree with that. And he's having some success. He's got a player, his top player that's out right now, or has been out with injury. But they beat West Virginia when West Virginia was still undefeated. They go out, like you said, on a neutral site and beat Arizona. So he's already got some good wins in the non-conference. Mike Anderson's going to do a good job wherever he's at. Now, again, I don't see him as a great coach. Once upon a time, I thought there was a combination of things he could do to be a really, really good coach. But I think he falls somewhere in between good and really good. The way that recruiting's changed, I always thought that was going to continue to make things tougher for him here at Arkansas.
Right.
Being in New York, he's probably going to be able to get players just from where they're located, because that's a great base, and there's so many players to choose from, and not every school is going to be able to cherry pick everything. He's going to, even if he can't recruit with some guys, he's just going to get some by default. So I think, and plus I think he knows how to recruit in terms of recruiting to his system. I think that was something else he didn't get a lot of credit for. So I think Mike Anderson's always going to have success.
He seems to have ignited a fire there at St. John's, and I think the firing, if anybody knows Mike Anderson, and I don't know him personally, you have had dealings with Mike Anderson, you know that it don't take much to stoke a fire in him, and I think that this firing probably did that for him.
Well, maybe it did. I think a lot of fans felt like he wasn't passionate enough, that he didn't, he did not interact enough in games, didn't get fired up enough. And, I think in some ways there's some validity to that, but also, people are different. People that are very competitive and want to win, sometimes they don't show it in their mannerisms or the way that they behave, and you can't necessarily hear it in the tone of their voice. I think Mike Anderson's competitive. I think that's a reason when you look at his career that he's never had a losing record. That's not easy to do. I know a lot of people say, well, that shouldn't be the standard for a coach at Arkansas, and I agree with that. But at the same time, I think it says a lot about his competitive nature. He doesn't like to lose, and he works hard to make sure, even when the chips are down, he lost all those players before that 2015-16 season. That was a very competitive team, and technically it broke even on the season, wasn't a losing record, but that team was, in 8 to 10 games that were 1 or 2 possession games at the end. They just didn't have enough firepower at a couple of spots to get over the hump, but that was not that far from being an NCAA tournament team itself. And that team went through a lot in the off season. So I think he's just a guy that has proven over and over again that he is competitive and that he wants to win and will win.
Now, I'm not going to, those that are watching right now, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time talking about Mike Anderson, much more time. But I do think that the contrast of how Razorback fans as a whole feel about Mike Anderson and how they feel about Chad Morris is kind of funny. But I do think that Arkansas has won, and I believe that Mike Anderson has won as well as far as this change goes. Arkansas has lit a fire under its base and under its fan base with the excitement that Musselman has brought not only on the court but off the court as well with his recruiting. This is the recruiting that so far that Musselman has done has been something that people here at Arkansas have longed to see for quite a while.
Yeah, the recruiting's been, it's really weird too. I've been thinking about this. By the time since he's been here, it's been a little over 8 months now. He signed 5 college transfers. He got his first commitment out of the high school ranks from a 2021 kid, Duncan Powell, out of DeSoto, Texas. But then he's got 1 signee for the 2020 class, 3 more committed. So when you look at the commitments and the signings, it's 10 players. 10 players.
Wow.
And only one of those guys is really contributing right now. That's Jimmy Witt. The other one, John Tilsilla, plays. He's not a big contributor. But if you start thinking about that, most of those 2020 guys that either signed or committed, that was done by mid-November. The team had only played a handful of games in the Eric Musselman era, and he'd already shaped, in many ways, the future of Razorback basketball with all of those signings and commitment. Now, the commitments still have to sign, but the point is that it just shows you, if you really go back and think about it, Mike Anderson's biggest class ever was the one that his last class that he signed with those 6 freshmen, and then he had Darius Hall and C.J. Jones left the program following that season that he'd signed 6 high school players in the early period, and then he added 2 players, Mason Jones and Ibi Ali. And if you look at that class, Isaiah Joe, Desi Sills, Reggie Chaney. You look at a guy like Mason Jones. Eric Musselman inherited some good pieces from that class. But to sign 10 players as a first-year guy, and you're not 8 months on the job, and you haven't even played that many games, I think it says a lot about the perception of him as a coach, because he has done nothing yet really to show what he's going to do at Arkansas, yet people trust him. These players and families want to be a part of it. And that's the part of recruiting I don't think that Mike Anderson was able to benefit from here. I think even when he proved that he was fixing the program, there was still resistance, and it seemed like an uphill battle all the time, even with some of the top players they got. And I think with Eric Musselman, we're seeing a lot of fast results before he's really done anything here. Now, he's obviously got the NBA pedigree and the track record there. He did a really good job at Nevada. But I think my point is it is a very much a contrast what Arkansas left behind when they let Mike Anderson go and what they've gained now with Eric Musselman. Of course, everything comes down to wins and losses. I know recruiting is its own sport, and a lot of people judge that, and they get excited by that. But we're going to really have to follow and see how this translates down the line with this guy. But it looks really good right now, Brian.
It does, and it seems like that he is winning right now with smoke and mirrors. Now, I might not be giving them enough credit, and I think there's a lot of people around there around the area that aren't giving him enough credit or this team, I should say, enough credit for what they are and who they are. But so far, 10-1. Of course, they don't have a ton of Power 5 opponents, and they've got one coming up this weekend. What do you make of this basketball team right now and how good they actually are?
Okay, so their record is good. I think this team can be a good team, and has shown signs of it. Even against some of these mid majors, there's no night off in college basketball. Kentucky lost to Evansville. We see it all the time. Mid majors come up and bite. You look at, Stephen F. Austin going into Duke and beating Duke. All right, so we know that. So Arkansas's done what they're supposed to do. It's not easy to do. Valparaiso came in and made a bid, and Arkansas turned them away. Now, I think once we get into SEC play, we're really going to learn more about the deficiencies here because, Adriel Bailey's having a fine season, but at 6'6", he's really your only post player. Reggie Chaney is a guy that's getting minutes, and he can help Arkansas, but he's not to the point where I was expecting him to be this year, quite frankly, and I think Eric Musselman and the staff are really working to get him where they can really rely on him to play bigger minutes and have more productivity and have a bigger impact. But right now, it's really Adriel Bailey's their chief guy in there. And I think once you get into SEC play, I think that we're going to see some hiccups because of that. As good as Arkansas is defensively, most of that's perimeter defense. They scrap, they claw, they have to really time things well on the way that they help, the way that they defend big guys. So, at some point, due to fouls, Arkansas continues to have problems with turnovers. They did against Valparaiso. They're just not big enough because they're going to lose rebounding battles and they're going to give up points inside. They're just not, because of that, they're just not good enough if they're turning the ball over and struggling to shoot the ball like we've seen. There's just only so much of a combination of those things that you can endure and expect this team to have even a winning record in SEC play. So to answer your question, how good is this team? I don't think we know yet. But the weaknesses I see still make me think that there's a chance that this team, maybe breaks even or even has a losing record in SEC play. I think the ceiling is probably 20 wins, just based on what I've seen. But the SEC's down too this year. I think when you look at that, that may give Arkansas fans some hope. That the SEC is a little down from where it was projected it would be. There's been some interesting, puzzling losses on the resume for a lot of teams in this league. So that may be some, Texas A&M, Arkansas gets to play them twice. They're down this year.
Right.
Arkansas has to go to Alabama. They're not great. That might be a road win they can get. So there's some things that could fall their way. But you asked me how good this team is, and I'm kind of walking around the block a couple of times on it because I'm not sure. Right. I want to see them get into that SEC grind. How are they going to deal with 2 games a week against that level of competition, and how are they going to compensate with the lack of size and depth in the front line? Are they going to, if they take care of the basketball, Brad, and they're able to get guys like Desi Sills and Isaiah Joe have slowly been increasing their three-point shooting. If those things continue, if they can get Mason Jones, not to be Jekyll and Hyde, great game here, and then kind of disappear. If they can just get certain things to kind of move the needle and continue to improve, I think they can get to 20 wins.
Does 20 wins get them into the tournament?
Maybe. And let's see. I mean, if they, Indiana, I don't expect them to go on the road and win that game. If you win that game, now you're 11-1. You've got a solid non-conference road win under your belt, and then maybe at that point, if you only went 9-9 in the SEC, and it depends on who you beat in winning some of those games, you might be able to sneak in. Let's say that they lose at Indiana and they're at 10-2, they still get TCU in the SEC Big 12 Challenge at home. Not sure how good TCU is going to look on that resume as a home win, but then you might be a little dicey. So I think, just looking at ESPN's bracketology that came out today, Arkansas is projected as a play-in game 12 seed. That is the definition of being on the bubble. Now, we know it's still early, but the point is, with the SEC being a little bit down and perception probably saying, well, the league's kind of slipped a little bit after the past 2 years of showing it was a strong league basketball conference, I think those perceptions could hurt Arkansas when you're talking eye test. So if you go 9-9 and your wins you loaded up on, sweeping Texas A&M and beating a struggling Alabama team, and maybe you beat Missouri, split with them, and they're not very good. So at the end of the thing, it may not be good enough to hold up as an at-large resume, and you might need to win 2 or 3 games in the SEC tournament. So I think there's a path to get to finishing with 20 wins and being an at-large, securing an at-large bid. But I also think there's a path to being an NIT team with 20 wins.
I think that if Eric Musselman is able to get this team into the tournament, I mean, it's just one of the better coaching jobs that you will see in a very, very long time. This team is deficient in so many ways, but he's able to accentuate the strengths, and I guess that's probably one of the things that I have been so impressed with by him is the way that he can get these guys to make strengths strong and make weaknesses weak for him to be able to do some of the things that he's done here at Arkansas so far.
No doubt about it. I mean, they are basically playing with a lineup that goes from that runs 6'3" to 6'6". That's it. I mean, Adriel Bailey's your big man, and the perimeter defense has really been outstanding for the most part. It's not just the fact that they're able to hold teams, keep teams in check percentage-wise from three-point land, but a lot of these teams that come in with volume three-point shooters, those guys struggle to even get shots off. Arkansas does a really good job of limiting attempts and just shutting guys down on the perimeter. Now, there's exceptions to it, but for the most part, that's been the case. I think the other thing is Arkansas has been a good free throw shooting. That was not the case Saturday night. That was part of the problem. But before that game, they came in second in the SEC behind Kentucky. Arkansas was shooting 76% on the season. That's another thing. Also, if you're scrapping and clawing and you're a good defensive team and you're in some close games, that's how you win close games. If you go back to 2016-17, Mike Anderson, that team started out the season 10-1. And if you remember one of those games, they won at the very end, a close game against Texas and Houston. And that was a game where free throw shooting pulled Arkansas. And when you got into conference play, they pulled out some games just at the free throw line. So little things like that we take for granted sometimes can be the difference in close games and wins and losses. So Arkansas, I think Musselman understands what the strengths and weaknesses of his teams are, and he's trying to maximize and accentuate, like you said, the word you used, those strengths. Obviously, it's the backcourt. We haven't seen Isaiah Joe be a great shooter like he was last year, but he's still a good shooter from three. His numbers are respectable. Where he's really gotten better is defensively. He's one of the top defenders in the nation, and according to several advanced metrics. We saw him make a huge defensive play against Valpo to help turn that game around. You see a guy like Desi Seals and his toughness. You look at Jimmy Witt, who's been brilliant in the mid-range and kind of an old-school throwback kind of player and the team's leading rebounder. Musselman cobbles this thing together and plays to the strengths of the players. There's no doubt about it. But at some point, Brad, you're going up against really good coaches now once you step in SEC every weekend, and there's players in this league. And I think Arkansas's got to continue to grind and find ways to win close games because they're going to be in a lot of them. This team's not good enough to blow people out most nights.
Right. I'm with you 100% on that. I think that you're going to see a lot of close ball games. Arkansas's defense seems to be good enough, I think, to be able to keep them in ball games. I do think they're probably going to run into a buzzsaw here and there in the SEC, which is, it's really not uncommon. I mean, it happens to some of the best teams. You just go in to an Auburn when they're hitting threes and you just don't have a chance, or you just get dominated on the inside, maybe by Florida with Kerry Blackshear Jr. and that group. I mean, there's always something, and you're right. There is coaches that are going to go against Arkansas's weaknesses and try to exploit them. But, again, you've got a guy on the sideline of the Razorbacks that's pretty good as well, and we'll see. I mean, I'm with you. I think that you're probably looking at a bubble NCAA team versus NIT team. But I do think that you can look at the improvement so far and be encouraged with what you see.
Yeah. Again, I think one of the things that was very interesting, Arkansas got off to such a great start when they beat Rice in the season opener, 91-43. The defense was unbelievable. The offense was clicking. And after that game, it just became every game was a grind. The defense played well. The offense struggled. A lot of low-scoring games. And then it was weird because when I was driving up to cover the Tulsa game. That was a 12:30 tip, so I'd usually try to get there when the doors open to the arena an hour and a half before tip. So leaving Little Rock, was an early drive, and I was talking to a friend on the phone while I was driving up there, and I said, you know what? I said, Arkansas, to me, one of the biggest things, and Jimmy Witt is a great player, I said, but I've noticed they've really been relying on his scoring lately, and the perimeter shooting hasn't been there. I said, but the fallback to that, and the flip side of that is, he's a guy that's a ball-dominant type of player. He has to really work and hunt, kind of drive a guy down, back him down, have the turnaround jumper, a lot of late shot clock execution where basically they're just counting on him to finish. I said that's really kind of stifled some of the movement. Not that he's not a good player, because he's an excellent basketball player, but it's just styles. And I said guys like Desi and guys like Isaiah Joe, part of their success is not just shooting threes in a half-court set, but getting some of those transition and secondary transition three-point opportunities they're just not getting. And I had that conversation. It was so weird. So Arkansas has its best offensive game this season, 98-79, just a few hours later. And Musselman talked about it in the post-game press conference. It made me feel better about my basketball knowledge. I just had the conversation before the game with somebody, and he mentioned it. He goes, we've been talking to Jimmy Witt about pushing the ball, and getting off the ball quicker. And it wasn't his fault. It's not like it falls on one guy. Sometimes it's a way that a guy plays. If you look at Jalen Harris, he was a big reason last year that Arkansas got a lot of those transition three looks for Isaiah Joe and Desi Sills and even Mason Jones. And Arkansas is trying to get back to that. They're trying, and that's the thing about Musselman too, is that because he's constantly scouting, constantly trying to improve and build on things, he knows he's going to have to tweak things as he goes and deal with things on the fly. But I thought it was very interesting that Arkansas got off to such a great start Saturday, 18-5. One of Isaiah Joe's first three-pointer was a Jimmy Witt secondary transition. The defense wasn't set. He was pushing. He turned around and tossed it back to Zay for that three. And I thought, okay, they've kind of unlocked something here. And then, Valparaiso did just such a great job being physical, man-to-man defense. Every time Arkansas screened or did anything in their movement to free somebody up, it was almost as though Valpo had written the playbook for them, because they were ready. They were in position. Yeah. They rotated well, and it was almost like a mirror, because Arkansas played that way defensively all year as well. So Arkansas kind of went back into that and fell back into that grind situation. So I think that's going to be a hurdle for Arkansas. I think the shooting gets better when they can get some of it in transition. This is why I think we're going to see maybe even more of Jalen Harris on the ball and letting Jimmy play some off the ball. And we've seen Jalen Harris do some good things this year in his minutes. He's really been the best guy off the bench outside of the starting five.
I've talked about Jimmy Witt as being the smartest basketball player that I've seen come through here in quite some time. What do you make of that? Do you agree with that, or do you feel like because I watch Jimmy Witt and I look at him as a guy that, he's not a great shooter, but he understands where to get to his spots and where to shoot from. He never takes a three-pointer. He does a lot of good things to help the offense run. Tell us, what do you think about that statement about Jimmy Witt being one of the smartest, if not the smartest basketball player in quite some time through here?
He's a very smart player. That no doubt that he's cerebral and a high floor IQ. And the stuff I just described was more about his style of play and not him as not being able to play a certain way. I just think it's a style. He's just not an up-tempo kind of guy. He prefers to settle down on that half court and go to work, and that's what he does. He's surgical in the way that he gets into that shot. And we say he's not a great shooter, but he's the best shooter on the team percentage-wise because he knows where to take them. Like you said, he's not going to take a three. He knows what his strengths are. He's a guy that can back a guy down, and that turnaround in the mid-range around the paint is so tough. He can even, I've seen him when the shot clock's getting down, and he can go left or right and kind of hit that fadeaway 16-footer. So, his range is not just around the basket. He can stretch it out a little bit there. The big problem with him, too, though, is that he's so active around the basket. That's the kind of guy that's going to get to the foul line. And when he does, the percentage isn't great. You've seen the shot. But, gosh, the way that he gets rebounds, he's got maybe the longest arms I've seen on a guy 6'3". But his timing and his want to, he goes in and battles, man, for those rebounds. And I really thought he was going to be a guy that once he got that defensive rebound was going to turn and really push fast to get the team in transition. And we haven't seen enough of that. He's been, like Musselman says, a walk-it-up guy. And I think as they continue to work with him, even he can get better because he is a smart basketball player. And smart basketball players know that they're still a work in progress and there's things they can do better. So I think we'll see his maturation. I think we'll see him understand he's going to have to get things moving a little faster for this team to be at their best. But yeah, I think he's been a big reason. I even wrote about this last week in my Hog Food for Hog Thought piece that I do pretty much weekly for Hogville.net, and I made a case that 3 Arkansas guards should be in the early conversation, at least conversation, for having all SEC stuff. Obviously, Mason Jones and Isaiah Joe are in that conversation, but I think Jimmy Witt is too. And when I say all SEC, between first and second team, there's 13 to 15 players they pick, plus they pick an all-defensive team. Jimmy Witt, we didn't talk about this, he's an elite defender. He guards every team's best player and has done an outstanding job. And so I think if you look at his overall contribution, he's a guy that's a fringe all-league type of performer so far. When you start talking about the different available all-SEC teams by the end of the season. So, kind of working my way back around. If you really want to say who's Arkansas's best all-around player, I think it's a toss-up between Jimmy Witt and Isaiah Joe when we're talking both ends of the floor. But Jimmy Witt's been excellent for Arkansas so far.
He absolutely has been. I do wonder where Arkansas would be without him. And, it makes me think, Kevin, about guys and, I guess me dreaming a little bit, being an old school guy that likes the college game and, wishes that you would see more guys that were like, third, fourth year, maybe even fifth year players being able to get out on the court. I mean, how much better could the game be if you had more guys that had a little bit more talent even that would stay for this long, kind of stay in the cooker? The NCAA is the minor league for basketball. I know that they have the G League now, but it's still the main minor league for basketball. And it just, for me, and again, this is just me dreaming a little bit, the Todd days of the world stayed 4 years back, 20, almost 30 years ago. I'd love to be able to see, more guys stay and be smarter, be more cerebral, understand the game more. I think it could help the NBA if they would do that. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, it's the game now. If you go back to it and you really look at it at the high school level, even the junior high level, players are moving around. They're trying to find a better fit, a place that's going to help them get the best competition, get the best training, get the best opportunities. Everybody sees himself as a pro, and the game, the decision making around the game is based on that mentality. That's why we see so many college players coming and going. You'll see a lot of players now that'll be at 3 different schools. That's almost like being an NBA free agent, right? You get a guy that signed somewhere like Jimmy Witt did, and then he transfers after his freshman year, and then he plays a couple of years and graduates early. He decides he wants to go somewhere else. Well, now, Jimmy Witt came back to Arkansas, but this is technically his, really effectively his third stop. And, you look at Jean Tilsilla, this is his third school. So, when you start looking at all levels of basketball being treated with that NBA mentality, you start to understand why maybe the perception that all levels of basketball are somewhat watered down. It's not that the talent's not there. It's that at all levels, guys are not going through the old school process of earning their time, their minutes, really their production. When you see these freshmen playing, for example, or you see NBA rookies playing, sometimes they're playing just because they were drafted early and they're putting up numbers. But the quality of overall play, the quality of teams overall, I think suffer because of that, because they're still in a learning process.
Right.
So even though the productivity looks good, it was hard for me to articulate that, even though sometimes the productivity looks good numbers-wise, sometimes the overall player and the overall value of the player and what it means for wins and losses and what it means for the strength of the team, I think some of that gets a little watered down while guys are still going through a learning curve. And when you have so much movement for young players, whether it's high school, grassroots, or even college, I think it takes even longer and waters it down even more. But now you see on the back end with the Jimmy Witt, now we're seeing what we probably would have seen had he just stayed at Arkansas.
Right.
We probably would have gotten here anyway. And so from that standpoint, it's just, on one hand, you're saying, why don't these young men realize this and just stay put? It's easier for us to say when the mentality for all basketball now is based on, I see myself as playing in the pro game someday, and this is what I need to do.
Yeah. I would love to at some point just hear the story. I'd love to hear it out of his own mouth about the journey that led Jimmy Witt back here, why he left in the first place. I know there's been speculation. I mean, there was speculation, the fact that Daryl Macon and Barford were coming in, and that was one of the reasons why he left. And I mean, there's just so many reasons that could have been out there. I would love to hear his side of the story on why he left and why he came back. But of course, we kind of know why he came back. But I'm going to get you out of here with this, Kevin, and we really appreciate you joining us. I feel like when I say this, I'm not just saying this. You're the best in the business and giving people information, and I know that they love to hear it. And so I'm going to get you out of here with this. We've got Indiana coming up. It's the second to last non-conference game, although it's pretty much the last of the non-conference season, even though you got TCU mixed in there. What do you see of this game, and what are the chances Arkansas can go into Assembly Hall and pull the upset?
Yeah, upset. It would be an upset. I mean, I think if your defense travels, you always got a chance. And I don't think this is a team that's going to blow a lot of folks out. We haven't seen much of that really lately. You're not going to go into Bloomington and blow out Indiana. But if they can hang in there and give themselves a chance and knock down the free throws when they need them, they're going to have a chance to win that game. I hear people saying they think Arkansas is going to get blown out. I don't see that either. I'm not predicting a win. I think Arkansas probably loses this game, but I'm not counting them out. If their defense travels and they don't kick the ball around and turn it over a lot, they can survive getting beat on the glass by a bigger team. If they don't turn the ball over and they win that battle and make free throws, I think they're going to have a chance to win it.
Well, if you go back to just the last two meetings between these two teams, I mean, it was a 1-point game at Bud Walton Arena and a 2 or 3 point game in the NIT at Indiana last year. I mean, and that was without Daniel Gafford. So it's good. It will be interesting to see how these two teams match up and the differences in the two teams. No doubt about that each team is different than they were last year by a long stretch. I'm sure for Arkansas. Well, I know for Arkansas, and I'm sure for Indiana as well. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how they end up matching up. Of course, this is a nice measuring stick for Arkansas, and then also to bolster their chances of making the NCAA tournament. I feel like a victory at Indiana would put them in the right position going into conference to be in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, you pick up a win like this, and assuming Indiana is going to continue to have a good season and be a team that's projected to the NCAA tournament, it's huge on that non-conference, out of conference resume. It's a road win, and again, it may be the difference. It may be the kind of game that's the pushing that nudges you over. If you're a 9-9, 10-8 SEC team and on the bubble, it may be just that kind of a win if you could get it that puts you in.
I think you're on something for sure. Well, Kevin, listen, man, we really appreciate you joining us on Tusk Talk, and again, I can't say enough of how I really believe that you are the man when it comes to information, especially on the basketball side of things, and we know that you can talk football as well. And I just want to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas, and to all our watchers and listeners out there, Merry Christmas as well.
Thank you, Brad. All you guys back there at River Valley, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I enjoy being on this and doing this with you, so look forward to the next one.
All right. Well, Kevin, we appreciate it, and we will talk to you next week.
Yes, sir. Look forward to it.
Kevin McPherson on with us once again. Kevin is a friend of mine, and we've known each other for quite a while. And again, I can't say enough about how much I appreciate him being on and giving us the information that he has. He's always a wealth of information on the basketball side of things. And, it's a time to be excited about the basketball program at Arkansas and really a time to be excited about the program as a whole is because, not only are things at least looking in the right direction in football right now, at least for the time being, but baseball is on its way. And, there's really not a lot of questions that are going on with baseball right now. So it's going to be a good time to be a fan of the Hogs. And, we've talked about this. We're journalists, but we're also fans. And I would venture to say that most people, they should probably just admit that. And that's where we are right now. We admit it. And we're okay with that, but we like to try to be as objective as we possibly can. Again, we want to thank you for watching Tusk Talk and making it the success that it is. I feel like we've got some really good things coming down the pipe with it. And, we're just going to continue to bring you the best knowledge that we can of all things Razorback each week at 2 p.m. on Monday. So, again, I want to say Merry Christmas to everybody that is watching, and we will see you next time on Tusk Talk.